What's up, everybody? It's Ty the Bourbon Guy, and welcome back to another whiskey review. Today, we're going to take a look at Peerless High Rye Bourbon. Peerless is a company that comes out of Kentucky, and there's a lot of history there in terms of a brand that existed prior and is brought back by the family of today. But with all that aside, the thing that's important to me is their quality of whiskey overall. So for me, Peerless Rye, which is where they started, it is one that actually changed my mind about rye whiskeys as a category. And that to me is pretty amazing because I don't remember exactly what year this would have been, but it would have been maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. And I actually was not a fan of rye whiskey at all. I didn't like the fact that the mintiness from it or that pine or the earthy notes, just was not a fan of it. And it clicked for me that maybe I wasn't a fan of rye because when I go into a rye whiskey bottle, I'm expecting or anticipating bourbon. I'm looking at that same experience, and I needed to separate myself and say like, no, now I'm dealing with a rye whiskey, not a bourbon. So it's not going to necessarily bring across those same notes. That was the way it was originally. Now I think what people are doing with rye whiskey is so unique that it has almost become its own thing. And it has always been its own thing, but it's almost becoming its own thing to me. But Peerless was one that I actually, again, after I tried a few different ryes, and there was way less ryes on the market than there are now, or way fewer ryes than there are now. But I was actually at Party Source out in Cincinnati, and or Kentucky technically. But yeah, I was out there and got a chance to go in there and look at some of the bottles, whatever, and they were sampling the Peerless Rye at that time. So the first thing I said was like, oh, I'm not a fan of rye, whatever. The guy there was like, okay, but try this one. So I did. And it was one of those where I took a sip and then I immediately looked back at him and was like, wait, what is this? And he said, Peerless Rye. And he explained it to me, whatever the case is, I bought a bottle that day. So that was really what changed my mind in terms of rye whiskey. And I think over time, we started seeing different distilleries in different parts of the country doing different things. There used to be maybe one mash bill or like a few that people kind of thought of when they thought of rye whiskey. And now people are doing a lot of things. They're finishing them. I've had rye at barrel strength. I've had different taste profiles, different mash bills, recipes, whatever you want to call it. And it starts to now change just my thought on rye whiskey as a category. But then it also changed my thought on Peerless as a brand. So that to me is where now all of a sudden, yes, I see this bottle that I know nothing about at a high price point, but now that I've tried it, I absolutely understand why that price point is there. And it made me curious, what else do they have planned in the future? So that's a long-winded way to say, now we're in the future. And now they have the High Rye Bourbon. And I've got a chance to try their Double Oak Bourbon. I've gotten a chance to try their Double Oak Rye. I've gotten a chance to try their other products in their lineup. And then I came across their High Rye Bourbon. So that's the one we're going to review today. Long-winded story. All you care about is what that whiskey tastes like. So let's get into it. So on the nose for me, it's got that same sweet oak, like maple syrup type of note. And the one note that I can't get off of, and I can't even pinpoint what it is specifically, but it makes me think of like a muffin, like some type of muffin. So definitely something sweet, something muffin there. I don't know. It's something, but let's get into it. Let's get into that palate. Cheers. It's almost like, at first I was thinking maybe blueberry muffin. I'm stuck on this muffin thing in case you guys can't tell. I thought maybe blueberry muffin. It actually kind of almost reminds me more of a banana nut muffin or something like that. But there's definitely that bready note of like, that sweet bread, like I said, like a muffin. The banana is slightly there. That nuttiness is there. So, but I can't tell if I'm being pulled in that blueberry fruit direction or not, but that's what this reminds me of. And even though I give specific tasting notes, one, do you like the whiskey or not? That's what matters. It doesn't matter what it's supposed to taste like, whatever. You're going to taste something different than what I am anyway. But what I do with my tasting experience, or when I review a whiskey or whatever the case is, or I'm trying to come up with notes, is I just sit with the whiskey and I just think to myself, like, what does it remind me of? So maybe I say sweet oak or it tastes like oak or whatever. I've never licked a tree in my life. So I don't know what oak tastes like. I know what it should taste like based on what it smells like. And you know, a lot of times that's what we're referencing, right? But at the end of the day, I just sip something and sometimes it even helps me to close my eyes and just think through, like, what does this remind me of? And I'm, in a weird way, asking myself, like, what are you tasting? So when I sip a whiskey and I, close my eyes and think through it, it's like, oh, you're tasting a banana nut muffin. And so for me, I just try to think through, like, what does this remind me of? That's what it reminds me of, a banana nut muffin. Let's keep going. Cheers. I'd say the finish on this is like a medium to long finish. Definitely get way more spice on that finish. It's 108 proof. I feel like it's that high rye, mash bill. I don't know if that's where the spice is coming from, but I would say that it drinks a little bit warmer than 108. I think the more you sit with it, the more it'll start to mellow back out, the more your mouth will kind of get numb to that and just kind of acclimate to a higher proof whiskey. But it still just has a little bit of that peppery type of spice on the back end that still warms it up a little bit more than the proof would suggest. This is also one of those ones that as I sip it and then go back to the nose, I get something different almost each time. A few times I've gone back to it, so that sweet oak is still there, kind of leaves, and then it goes into almost like a perfumey type of note. There's just more there with each sip, and it evolves, so it's pretty complex in my opinion, at least on the nose. The palate, as you start to acclimate to that whiskey, it's starting to evolve as well. So I would say this is a little bit more of a complex whiskey, to where you could sit with it for a longer period of time, and as this opens up, I can imagine that the flavors are going to open up and evolve along with it. So let's try this with a drop of water and see if it changes anything. So I think water brings that spice down a little bit, opens up that sweetness. So it's more of like a preference thing, because in my opinion, I think I would prefer this neat without water, because when you add the water, I feel like it loses the balance in this particular bottle. So, if you're a fan of sweet and you don't like the spice, then sure, add the water, and then that'll kind of bring that spice down and open up that sweetness. But if you're a fan more of like a balanced whiskey, you want the sweet and the spice to kind of mingle together, my suggestion would be to pour some maybe in a rocks glass or something like that, or in a Glencairn or whatever you're drinking out of, a tumbler, who cares? And just let it sit and kind of sit with it maybe for, a longer period of time. And I would imagine that as this opens up, you're going to start to see those flavors evolve a little bit more. I would be very interested in trying this on a rock. So just one ice cube and something that's going to slowly melt, and that water is going to slowly go into that whiskey, that type of thing. Again, this is one I think you got to sit with and experiment with and see what works best for you or what you're more of a fan of. Let's finish this one off. Cheers. So coming into this review, I was a fan of Peerless, a fan of everything that they've done so far. This bottle is not going to be any different for me. I'm going to rate it a 92 out of 100. And it's one that, it is a higher price point, but I think it's one that's worth it. I think it's not a bottle that I'm going to reach for every single day, but I could see this at, it's a Friday evening, long week at work, whatever the case is. And not saying to drink because you had a long week at work, nothing like that, but just in general, like something you want to sit down and you have a little bit more time to sit with a whiskey, weekend, family over, whatever the case is. This would be one I think I'd reach for at that point. And again, at that price point, I don't want to necessarily drink it every day anyway, because I don't want to fly through it and now I have to go buy another one. But I think in those special occasions, when you do bring this out, I think it would be special. I don't know that everybody's going to be a fan of it. If you have friends and family that come over, maybe some are kind of into whiskey, getting into whiskey, never had whiskey, whatever the case is. If they've never had it or if they're new to it, they're going to think it's too hot, in my opinion. I think that over a rock, maybe in some sort of old-fashioned or something like that, probably be pretty good. But I think if you have friends or family over that are more into whiskeys and kind of into more complex whiskeys or higher proof or hotter or whatever, the case may be, I think that person might be more of a fan of this than somebody else. I think if it's somebody that's relatively new, sticking with not necessarily lower proofs, but maybe something that's a little bit more approachable, or making it more approachable by putting it over on rocks or whatever, I I think that's what it boils down to. So for me personally, I'm going to try this a variety of ways and see which way I prefer or which way I think works better for other people. But end of the day, like I said, all you care about is this whiskey good or not? It is. 92 out of 100. It's one that when this is gone, I would love to replace the bottle if I can find it, and hopefully it's still at that price. In my area right now, it's about $150. But again, this is worth it. I think when you put it in the category of, or think of, maybe like a Discovery series, you know, some stuff from Bardstown is 150 plus or whatever the case is. I think there's a lot of whiskeys right now that are kind of floating around that $100 to $150 range. And so I've had plenty of them in that price range that I did not think were worth it at all. This one, not mad at it at all. So I definitely could see it. Thank you so much for tuning into this review. Thank you so much again for all the support, subscribing, and just following this journey. Thank you for watching this guy drink whiskey and tell you all about it. I appreciate it so much, and I'll see you in the next whiskey review. Cheers.